Hello and welcome to the Indian Society of Toxicology on YouTube. We will be discussing in this particular episode the duties of a doctor in a case of poisoning. Extremely important, not just for medical students for passing toxicology or forensic medicine and toxicology in their examinations, but also for all doctors engaged in the management of poisoning. Lot of confusion, lot of contradictory information out there. So we will try and resolve some of these and come to some sort of a statement that is non-controversial relating to the duties of doctors in poisoning. I would like to discuss these duties, which of course refer mostly to forensic or medico-legal duties, as the 10 Commandments. We will not be touching upon the treatment or management aspects, that is clinical. We are looking at mainly forensic or medico-legal duties. And as I said, there is a lot of controversy. So let's look at what I feel are the 10 most important points to remember when it comes to medico-legal responsibilities of a doctor in a case of poisoning. And when I say poisoning, it also includes, of course, envenomation, therapeutic drug overdose, substance abuse related cases, and so on and so forth. So let's look at these 10 commandments that must be very familiar to doctors who treat cases of poisoning, and also I feel that these are very important guidelines that need to be followed. And as far as medical students are concerned, they must remember these 10 commandments. So let's look at first commandment. Notify suspicious cases to police. Self-explanatory, isn't it? If a case of poisoning appears to be one of foul play, that is, there is suspicion of attempted homicide or attempted hurt on some other person with the help of a poison, naturally you have to report the matter to the police as the attending physician. With regard to cases that are DOA, dead on arrival, of course, all these cases, regardless of what the bystanders or relatives say, you will have to report to the police. These are all compulsory. And in this case, actually, there is no controversy at all, isn't it? Any case where there is suspicion of foul play, you feel that the case of poisoning is not accidental or even suicidal, somebody else is trying to kill somebody with poison, you have to, in the interest of justice, notify the police compulsorily. You can, of course, treat the case, but this one duty you must not neglect. Coming to the second commandment, which is a little bit controversial. Many textbooks on toxicology in India state explicitly that there is no need for private practitioners to notify accidental or suicidal cases, but government doctors must do so. In other words, doctors working in government hospitals. I'm not sure as to where this information came from. Why is this discrimination emphasized like this? That is, those doctors who are working in private hospitals or in a private capacity need not notify certain cases, but then government doctors must compulsorily do so. I really don't know. I think this is some kind of an urban legend. Some kind of information that was printed in some book or that was maybe mentioned by somebody long ago, and then it has been passed down from book to book, edition to edition, doctor to doctor, doctor to student. I don't think this applies at all. There is really speaking no difference whether you are in a private setup or in a government setup. All doctors must notify, as I've already emphasized, cases of foul play to the police. With regard to accidental poisoning or suicidal poisoning, it is left to the discretion of the doctors whether you believe this or not. Unless a case is one of a serious nature, the person's condition is deteriorating or maybe he's dying, in which case it's always safe to notify the police. It is not really all that essential. If it is accidental case, unless it involves a lot of people and the accidental poisoning was a result of negligence on the part of somebody else, you need not really make it a medico-legal case. And as far as suicide is concerned, we all know, or we should know, that the law has changed. And today we have what is called the Mental Health Care Act of 2017, in which it has been quite clearly stated that attempted suicide must not be taken to be a crime, and the police must be discouraged from registering a case, even though the section in the Indian Penal Code that deals with attempted suicide has actually not been deleted so far. That is section 309 of the Indian Penal Code. It is still there. This is a relic from the past. And I think over a period of time, this section will be removed. Even as of now, the section need not be enforced by the police. And in fact, police is said to not consider such cases of attempted suicide under any section of the Indian Penal Code. There are, of course, some doctors themselves who are, perhaps you can call them holier than thou, who have slightly outdated concepts of morality and ethics, who still consider attempted suicide as a kind of crime, and some of them may even go to the extent of saying it's a sin. But I'm sorry, everybody should follow the law of the land. And the law of the land states via the Mental Health Care Act of 2017, this is exactly what it says. Notwithstanding anything contained in section 309 of the Indian Penal Code, any person who attempts to commit suicide shall be presumed, unless proved otherwise, to have severe stress and shall not be tried and punished under the said code. What more do you want? It's so clear. So do remember, today all doctors can take it upon themselves to decide whether one should report a case of poisoning to the police or not. Only if you have suspicion that there is foul play involved on the part of somebody else, you should be doing that. And if not, if it is an isolated case of accidental poisoning without involving negligence, large-scale negligence on the part of somebody else, involving a lot of victims, or if it is a case of deliberate, ingestion of some poisonous substance or exposure by way of attempted suicide, one need not inform the police. But it is always better to monitor the condition of the patient, and if the condition is deteriorating or if the patient is dying, you feel, then it's always safer perhaps to take the opinion of another doctor and maybe even consider notifying the police. But there is flexibility here, and there is no such dogmatic rule or guideline that says you will have to report, especially if you are in government service. I think that is a kind of misconception. As I've already said, death occurs, do not dispose of the body to the relatives. Even if you have been convinced that it's a case of poisoning, maybe even accidental poisoning, do not issue a death certificate. like all other medico-legal cases, poisoning cases need to be reported to the police. All poisoning cases which result in death are medico-legal cases, whether accidental, suicidal or homicidal. So that's very important when we look at the third commandment. Third commandment, there is not much of controversy, and much of the time you find that doctors do report such cases to the police. Coming to the fourth commandment, there is no professional secrecy in poisoning cases. Important to remember. In other words, there is no doctor-patient confidentiality when it is a police case. Applies to all kinds of police cases, including poisoning. That does not, however, mean that you can go about tom-tomming this to the entire world and especially rushing to the media and talking about this, case of yours. Doctor-patient confidentiality does apply even in these cases, and only to the police or to the authorities concerned who are supposed to be investigating the case. You should give relevant information, even information that is covered by, as we say, professional secrecy. But the information should be conveyed only to the police and should not be conveyed to other people, especially not the press. So that's important. There is doctor-patient confidentiality here also, like in any other situation, but the police, if they want some information and they are investigating this as a kind of foul play, the doctor will have to reveal to the police whatever is important for investigation. This is the fourth commandment. Moving on to the fifth commandment. Every effort must be made to collect and preserve evidence in poisoning cases, whether accidental, suicidal or homicidal. If it's a therapeutic drug overdose, then you will have to look at anything in the scene that can help, like for instance strips of tablets or any loose tablets lying around. If it's a case of pesticide exposure, somebody has taken some pesticide, again you'll have to look around and find out at the scene. Or if it is the case of a body brought to the mortuary along with the belongings of the deceased, the doctor should look for any kind of evidence that may help the police investigate the case properly, even if it appears to be a straightforward case of accidental poisoning death or suicidal case. Sometimes there may be some information that may indicate otherwise, and if a doctor is not alert to this, there can be miscarriage of justice. So fifth commandment is very important. Do make every effort to collect and preserve evidence. Sixth commandment is related to that. In all living cases of poisoning or drug overdose, do collect relevant samples for analysis in order to clinch the diagnosis, especially when the diagnosis is uncertain. And this includes especially blood and urine samples, and if you have done gastric aspiration or maybe even stomach wash, you can preserve that also and subsequently dispatch it to the toxicology laboratory for analysis. If death occurs, you'll have to add, in addition to these body fluids, relevant viscera, we have already discussed in an earlier episode, for analysis to the nearest forensic science laboratory or the forensic science laboratory that is within the jurisdiction of the hospital. So details about the viscera we will not go into because that is not the focus here. If you have any doubt about what kind of viscera must be preserved in such cases, please do check the relevant presentation that I'm sure you'll be able to retrieve. And you will know as to what kind of viscera must be sent in cases of death for toxicological analysis, and if it's a case of living victim still being treated, then of course all you need to collect are body fluids like blood, urine, and if possible gastric aspirate. As to the quantity and preservative etc. have been discussed in another episode. All right, seventh commandment says, record dying declaration if the patient is on the verge of death. Very important. Sometimes the person who is dying, especially if the death is related to foul play, may say something that's of vital importance to investigation. He may be able to give some clue as to who did it, the culprit, and these can be investigated by the police, and such information is said to be vital to the case. So while many a time the police themselves record such declarations, or magistrate does it, or you can ask somebody else, some employee of the hospital or some other colleague if you don't have time. But if there's nobody around and the patient is sinking, you must do it yourself because it is in the interest of justice. And when you record it, there are some guidelines. Again, the details are not going to, but some of the important points are, number one, the declaration should be recorded verbatim, which means in the words of the dying person. As far as possible, you should not be asking questions in a leading fashion. You can ask questions, but they should be only questions that are aimed at clearing up some confusion. And in such a case, you must record both the question and the answer. Otherwise, just let the person speak, and whatever he says, you can record, and later on what is important will be taken into consideration, what is not can be discarded. That is left to the police and the authorities, not really the doctor. As far as possible, authenticate the declaration once it has been recorded by signing yourself and getting at least one or two witnesses to sign, and if possible the dying person, before he really dies, if he can sign what he has stated, that will be very good. Or you can maybe affix his thumb impression, but these are not essential. The signature of the person recording is very important, and witnesses. Coming to eighth commandment, if it is an undiagnosed poisoning death case, you must call for an autopsy via the police. Such autopsies are said to be medico-legal in nature. They are not really the clinical autopsy that may be done in some other kinds of cases where somebody has died in a hospital, diagnosis was not clear, to make sure as to what caused the death. That's a clinical autopsy, but here it is for the purpose of investigation as to was it really a case of poisoning, and if so, what kind of poison, and not only that, as to who was responsible for causing the poisoning. All those things will become clear only when a medico-legal autopsy is done. So, as I said earlier, when we say poisoning case, it also includes overdose and envenomation deaths. All these are medico-legal cases, and once death has occurred, all these cases will have to be mandatorily reported to the police, whether accidental, suicidal, homicidal, suspicion of foul play, or whatever. All right, moving on to the ninth commandment. This is so clear, isn't it? Every medico-legal case, you have to preserve records, detailed records. Never worry as to whether records that you are preserving are in excess. After all, you can dispose of excess, but if you have not preserved what is essential, you will regret this later. So, careful filing system is also important. All these records may come into importance sooner or later. We never know. You will have to preserve them for several months to years. I would suggest at least 5 years. And if you have enough space, you can maybe store those files for longer time. But do mention details, all details that are relevant to the case, and preserve them properly under lock and key. And finally, we come to the 10th commandment. And that is not really a medico-legal kind of commandment. It's a medico-social one. This is with regard to food poisoning cases, especially mass food poisoning that originate from public eateries like hotels or canteens or restaurants. A lot of people have been affected. They are all, flooding the hospitals Such cases, you will have to immediately notify the public health authorities, the district health authorities, because it's an outbreak. And if the outbreak is not immediately stopped, it can lead to a lot of people being affected, maybe even deaths from happening. So you'll have to, as a doctor, see to it that that does not blow up into a major kind of a problem where a lot of people are affected, a lot of people become ill, some of them die. So cases like this, you have to report, not really to the police, though they can also be alerted, but very important for the public health authorities to be alerted to a case of mass food poisoning. So these are the 10 commandments, extremely important for all doctors to remember who are managing cases of poisoning. And also with regard to medical students and their examinations, is a favorite question that comes in written part or maybe asked in the viva-voce. So please do remember all the important duties in the form of these 10 commandments. Thank you for watching, and this entire show has been brought to you by the Indian Society of Toxicology. If you have not subscribed already, do so please, and you will be notified regularly of such very useful, at the same time, I'm sure you'll agree, entertaining shows on various aspects of toxicology. See you all in the next episode. Goodbye.